Good evening, America. It is Thursday, May 7th, 7 p.m., and you're watching Q News Tonight, the world's only live LGBTQ evening news show. We begin right at the top of the hour with Breaking Q News. Our Breaking Q News is three parts tonight. As we report breaking news this afternoon, the CDC has severe new guidance on America's reopening plan, and the White House is not going to allow it. As President Trump rushes to reopen the economy, a battle has erupted between the White House and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention over the agency's detailed guidelines to help schools, restaurants, churches, and other establishments safely reopen.
The internal CDC guidance includes sections for child care programs, schools and day camps, churches and other communities of faith, employers with vulnerable workers, restaurants and bars, and mass transit administrators. The CDC submitted a secret draft of the guidance on April 23rd, which has now been leaked to the New York Times. But several federal agencies that reviewed the draft, including the Department of Labor and the Office for Civil Rights at HHS, protested, saying it would be harmful to businesses and the economy and too burdensome for houses of worship. The official supportive of the guidelines said that Dr. Birx was in favor of publishing them, and that Joe Grogan, the director of the White House's Domestic Policy Council, even tried to broker a compromise, but that others in the White House pushed back, especially on the worship section. Q News Tonight will continue to monitor this evolving story for the LGBTQ community.
We continue in our Breaking Q News by reporting, hey, Vladimir Putin, we know you hate the LGBTQ community, but if you're listening to Q News Tonight, high five to you. Your asset is still in place. The National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who famously chanted at the podium of the Republican National Convention, "Lock her up, lock her up," was removed as the NSA advisor because he was deemed to be vulnerable to blackmail from Russia.
He was later charged with lying to the FBI and to Vice President Pence. The Attorney General and Justice Department filed criminal charges against Flynn. He later pled guilty and apologized for the lies and admitted to the crime. This afternoon, in a stunning move, the Justice Department filed a motion to ask the judge to drop Michael Flynn prosecution on the grounds that it should have never been pursued.
Honestly, LGBTQ America, with Donald Trump and this White House, it's not fake news to say you can't make this stuff up.
We also continue in our Breaking Q News Tonight to report that 3 million more Americans filed jobless claims last week, bringing the total to 33 million since COVID-19 began. Before we tell you the details of the story, we've prepared a package. Watch this.
With the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create an interactive map of the real-time economic impact of COVID-19. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Steve, I want to begin with you on these latest numbers, nearly 3.2 million unemployment claims. It's a measure, perhaps, of how bad this crisis is. That's viewed as better than last week when we had 3.8 million claims. Going back into March, 6.9 million claims were made on March 28th, 6.6 million the week after, 5.2 million after that, 4.4 million, 3.8 million, and now nearly 3.2 million claims. As I said, Steve, that brings us to more than 33 million Americans in the last 7 weeks.
First-time filings for unemployment insurance hit 3.17 million last week, bringing the total to 33.5 million over the past 7 weeks. The Labor Department reported Thursday. Stock market futures reacted little to the data and continued to indicate about a 300-point gain at the opening of the Dow Jones Industrial Average.
At the current pace, the week claims numbers should fall below 1 million by mid-June, according to Ian Shepherdson, chief economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Quote, "We're very hopeful that June will see the beginnings of a rebound as states begin to reopen," Shepherdson said. The jump in continuing claims, quote, "is a little disappointing since it suggests few people are being recalled to work," said Paul Ashworth, chief U.S. economist at Capital Economics.
The latest job claims numbers come a day before the Labor Department releases its non-farm payrolls report for April. Economists surveyed by Dow Jones expect a plunge of 21.5 million, easily the worst month in U.S. history, with the unemployment rate surging to 16%. Tomorrow's federal jobs report for April is expected to be the worst in history.
Those are our breaking Q news. So again, America, good evening. It's 7 p.m. Thursday, May 7th, and we are going to bring you so many of the important stories for the LGBTQ community exclusively on Q News Tonight. Tonight on the world's first live daily queer evening news show.
Tonight's news about the gay community and the news from an LGBTQ perspective. Are our gay stories important to you? In headlines, politics, entertainment, gay culture, travel, religion, and more. Reported by respected anchors.
Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight. Thank you for joining Q News Tonight. We are live. This is a live show, so anything can happen. Tonight we bring you the news and a perspective from the LGBT community. I just told you all we're live, right?
Yeah.
Be sure to stay tuned tonight as we have great questions and answers with our favorite gay doctor, Dr. Howard Grossman, in our Thursday very important segment, Q's Q&A on coronavirus and the LGBT community. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and this is my co-guest anchor, Misty Eyes.
Hi. So I'm super excited about a drag queen book by Little Miss Hot Mess.
Did you just become Alaska?
No, I became Misty Eyes.
Oh, I thought she was quoting me.
And my friend Anchor Napoleon Plays.
Hey, everybody. Find out later tonight if Trump may have been exposed to COVID-19. You'll want to hear the details.
Let's cue up tonight's news. First, let's catch up on all the news surrounding COVID-19 with our quarantine quickies. The first story tonight is our daily reporting of the coronavirus facts. First in Quarantine Quickies, coronavirus facts for Thursday, May 7th, 2020. We first begin with COVID-19 cases. Based on the standard acceptance of LGBTQ 7% of population, we report tonight that the LGBTQ population in the U.S. Infected with COVID-19 now stands at almost 89,000 Americans. World LGBT infection rates are now over 270,000 people. Total world cases are now almost 3.9 million, and the total USA infections are closing in on 1.3 million. Remember, the USA is just 4.4% of the world's population, and now we account for 32.8% of the world's cases, slightly lower in percentage today. In deaths, LGBTQ deaths in the United States now stands at just short of 5,300 from our community, and worldwide in the LGBT community, we are just short of 19,000 deaths. Total world deaths of all populations is 267,000, and in the US, we have crossed 75,000 deaths. Reminder, the US is just 4.4% of the world's population and now accounts for a full 28.2% of the world's death, a percentage higher today. President Trump and Vice President Pence have had a lot to say about how successful they have been on testing. Let's watch them.
Importantly, anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful. Anybody that needs a test gets a test.
So when you said 4 million tests 7 weeks ago, you were just talking about tests being sent out, not actually being completed? I'm a little confused.
John, I think they're precisely correct. that in my first week on this job, we were informed that HHS, I believe IDT was the vendor, Admiral Giroir, that had distributed 1 million, was distributing another 4 million, and we believe they did. But again, those were tests that, frankly, but for the president's leadership, we'd still be waiting on those tests to be done in many cases.
Q News Tonight reports the USA testing total is now 8,125,000. The president misleads all of us by saying that this is the largest number in the world. However, it is really a failure. With 328 million Americans, and after 4 months, our government has tested only 2.5% of Americans. And source contact tracing is even a smaller percentage. The medical community recommends a 10% level on ongoing testing thresholds to be successful. Therefore, Q News Tonight's continues the grading of the federal COVID-19 testing and source contact tracing continues to be an F. Q News Tonight also reports the Hall of Fame of the best states in testing their population percentages. Number 3 is New York at 5.4%. New to our list in the top states is number 2, North Dakota has moved to 5.5%, and number 1 continues to be Rhode Island at 7.5%. LGBT America, we hope you don't live in one of these states, as we report on Q News Tonight's The Hall of Shame for the states doing the worst job in testing in their state. Number 5 is Arizona with just 1.61%. This means that just 16 people out of every 1,000 have been tested. Number 4 is South Carolina. Number 3, Ohio. Number 2, Kansas. Say it with me, America. Number 1, poor Puerto Rico. Just 0.38% have been tested. Special note tonight on Puerto Rico. They have done almost no testing on the island in the last 10 days, and so far have only tested only 38 people out of every 1,000.
Quarantine quickies. Travel industry is in danger of collapse due to COVID-19. The statement warned, quote, "A huge number of small and medium enterprises are affected by dire consequences threatening their sustainability. This puts millions of jobs and livelihoods at risk. This also hampers our collective capacity to drive any economic recovery. In today's interconnected global economy, the spillover effects created by the failure of one critical industry will result in the collapse of all the others. Like dominoes, the collapse of the worldwide travel industry could lead to the collapse of almost every industry on the planet."
The letter that is also signed by the IOE, the International Organization of Employers, the IRU, the International Road Transport Union, and the IAF, International Apparel Federation, said, quote, "The COVID-19 pandemic is above all a human tragedy, which is having disastrous consequences on the health of hundreds of thousands of people. These organizations represent more than 50 million companies and account for 700 million jobs across the aviation, road transport, apparel, travel, and tourism industry, almost a quarter of the global workforce."
Travel and airline sector leaders have warned an unprecedented number of companies are on the verge of collapse in the face of COVID-19's crisis. Industry groups, including the International Airline Travel Association and the World Travel and Tourism Council, wrote an open letter today to G20 employment ministers ahead of an extraordinary meeting on Thursday, urging them to urgently remove bottlenecks to economic relief and increases in financial assistance to these enterprises worldwide.
Quarantine quickies. The UK economy is plunging towards its worst crash in 300 years. The UK economy is heading for its worst crash in more than 300 years because of the coronavirus pandemic. According to a new forecast from the Bank of England, the central bank said Thursday that the British economy could shrink by 14% this year. That would be the biggest annual contraction since a decline of 15% in 1706, based on the bank's own best estimate of historical data.
In a report that examined the impact of the pandemic, the Bank of England said that GDP contracted by 3% in the first quarter of this year and would fall by as much as 25% in the second quarter, leaving the economy at about 30% smaller than it was by the end of 2019. Unemployment is expected to increase to 9%, and the bank warned that it is more likely to have underestimated the scale of the economic crash than to overstate it.
According to Peter Dixon, economist at Commerce Bank, quote, "Current conditions are unprecedented in our lifetime, and all forecasters are struggling to make out where the economy stands now, never mind what happens in the future. But it is clear that the next few months are going to produce some of the biggest output falls on record."
Quarantine quickies. 58% of workers test positive for COVID-19. More than 700 employees at Tyson Foods meat factory in Perry, Iowa, have tested positive for the coronavirus as the nation braces for a possible meat shortage due to the pandemic. An Iowa Department of Public Health report released today showed that 58% of the factory's workforce had tested positive for the virus. Authorities said late last week that nearly 900 workers were confirmed to have the virus at a Tyson food plant in Indiana.
Tyson Foods said in a statement that the pandemic has forced the company to slow production and close plants in Dakota City, Nebraska, and Pasco, Washington, along with the Perry plant. John Tyson, board chairman of Tyson Foods, warned that the food supply chain is breaking in a full-page advertisement published last month in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Tyson Foods is not the only meat company facing worker infections.
A Smithfield Foods plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota closed in April after 2 workers died and 783 others tested positive for the virus. President Donald Trump signed an executive order to compel meat processing plants to stay open last week under the Defense Production Act. Trump said he will also provide liability protection. Quote, "We have had some difficulty where they are having a liability, where it's really unfair to them. I fully understand that it's not their fault," Trump said at a small business event in the White House last week.
Joe Biden, the apparent Democratic presidential nominee, said Monday that he feared for meatpacking workers. He said such plants, along with nursing homes, have become, quote, "the most dangerous places that are right now." They designate them as essential workers and then treat them as disposable, Biden said of the meatpackers.
Quarantine quickies. U.S. clinical trial for COVID-19 vaccine run by Pfizer begins at NYU. The first U.S. patients have been dosed in a clinical trial testing whether 4 experimental messenger RNA vaccine candidates can prevent infection with the virus that causes 2019 coronavirus disease, COVID-19. Pfizer Inc. and BioNTech SE today announced the trial's start with NYU Grossman School of Medicine and the University of Maryland as the first centers to enroll patients in the United States. The randomized phase 1 and 2 clinical trial will seek to enroll healthy patients to receive either 1 or 2 doses of one vaccine or a placebo, a saline solution.
The vaccines are being developed by Pfizer and BioNTech, which recently launched a similar first-in-human trial in Germany. Mark Mulligan, director of the Division of Infectious Disease and Immunology and the Vaccine Center at NYU Langone Health, said, quote, "We are excited to work with industry leaders to rapidly, carefully test state-of-the-art vaccine candidates with a goal of providing protection against this pandemic that has taken such a tremendous toll. Vaccines have always been our most effective weapon to protect the health of the public from infectious disease threats, which is why it's so important to study these candidates closely."
The study, vaccines, are part of the class called mRNA vaccines that with recent advances can quickly be computer designed, fabricated, and scaled up into millions of doses if successful and pending regulatory approval using high-speed machines. RNA-based vaccines are also, by their very nature, overt risk of infection and immune challenges that come with older vaccine types based on live, weakened versions of a virus. Well, that ends our segment on coronavirus quarantine quickies, and tonight we move into part 8 of Q&A on coronavirus and the LGBT community, May 7th edition. This special segment is designed to be unique in all of America to answer your questions about coronavirus for the LGBTQ community during this pandemic. Tonight we have an American pioneer in AIDS and HIV medical treatment. With us is Dr. Howard Grossman, specialist in internal medicine with an emphasis on HIV. He has had a private practice in Manhattan, which was one of the largest HIV practices in New York, and has become nationally recognized as an educator on HIV issues and as an advocate for LGBT civil rights and the rights of the community. Also of note, Dr. Grossman was one of the first people in Broward County here in Fort Lauderdale to contract coronavirus and has recovered. And so welcome tonight, Dr. Grossman, to Q News Tonight. Before we get into viewer questions, it's been another big week from science and the medical community. Where would you like to start on the big bullet point highlights of COVID-19?
Well, first, Al, thanks for calling me a pioneer. It makes me feel like I started practicing at Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, $20 later and we'll be all square.
Right?
You know, I always like to start with good news for this. And we did give some of that good news on Tuesday, but it's still this week, so let's talk about it again for viewers who missed it. This was the week when we found out that remdesivir, a drug from Gilead Sciences, had an effect to shorten the course of coronavirus infection in seriously ill people, and I think that's a really important development. I like to caution people, this is the first drug that's shown efficacy, as Dr. Fauci said. It's a first step. It wasn't a home run, it's not a slam dunk. Remdesivir, for people who wonder about it, is in the same class of drugs as a drug lots of people know that who are taking PrEP or on HIV drugs. It's very much, it's a nucleotide analog like tenofovir that's in drugs that many people are taking. And you know, there's some argument, but you know that with HIV, certainly we need to hit the virus from multiple points in its life cycle. And I suspect that that's the same thing here. And so we remember that drugs like AZT actually did have an impact on HIV for 6 months, but we needed to do combination therapy. And I think with COVID-19, we're going to need combinations, whether it's combination antivirals or things that help control the immune system so that we don't get this immune overactivation that people talk about. We're going to need combination drugs, but that was good news. The second good news, because we keep getting the question of whether people can be reinfected, and that came up also with Chef Josie this week, and that is that in South Korea, where they claimed to have a large number of people who looked like they were reinfected, there were actually 277 patients that they were claiming were reinfected. It turned out that it was actually that the test was picking up not active virus, but viral debris, leftover viral proteins and things that these people were carrying months after their infection, and the people were not infectious. So those 277 people that people worried about in South Korea, none of them were infectious. And I think that's a very important thing, because we know from other viruses that the PCR test, the nasal swab, the test that we do to check for acute infection, can stay positive in some of those infections for up to 4 months after infection when people are not infectious.
Dr. Grossman, let me make sure that we put a bullet point on the observation you just made. With that situation of continuing, Josie has tested positive for 40 days. I continue to read that people are getting multiple tests. Part of those 8 million that the president's bragging about, by the way, are getting tested each week, and they continue to show that they're positive. What you're saying is that's not correct in terms of infectious nature. So once we get to the 21-day threshold, they're not infectious anymore.
And that was my experience. My test stayed positive for 21 days, or 27 days actually, but at that point I had also developed antibodies. And clearly nobody around me got infected. So I'm guessing that's it's an N of one, as we say, is one person. You can't prove anything by one person, but it goes along with that pattern. But some people may stay PCR positive for a longer period of time. And that's part of why they say reserve that test for active infection, for people who are clearly acutely sick. Because in that case, you're testing somebody to say, oh, you have COVID-19. This isn't a heart attack. This isn't community-acquired pneumonia. This is COVID-19. It helps in the diagnosis, and that's going to impact treatment. But that may stay positive for a long time. The important thing seems to be developing antibodies. How long those antibodies work, how protective they are, what sort of level of antibodies you need to be protective, those are all questions that need to be answered.
I understand that in terms of the antibody test, you go to the hospital. Explain to us how we do that.
You can go to the antibody test by going to your doctor.
Mm-hmm. You administer it yourself, correct?
Right now, Quest and LabCorp are doing them commercially. They take 24 to 36 hours to come back.
So to Napoleon's point, you could go into your office and get an antibody test.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I did the test yesterday from today.
I plan on going to his office in the next week and getting it done. I think if it's available, then it's definitely a necessity, especially for people that are out there like us that want to help promote this and know that we're in the clear.
It's very much like a rapid HIV test. They pricked my finger and put my blood in a tube, put it in a thing.
That was the first test we had.
I did it 3 weeks ago.
And those tests, a lot of those tests are out there. We have to be cautious. A lot of them have not been validated by the FDA or any other regulatory agency. So those I'm a little bit more skeptical about. The Quest says that its test is 99.4% specific.
And walk us through how that's done. I didn't know this.
How can somebody out there that's watching today find a valid test for the antibodies, and not just for corona, but for COVID-19, and at a level that would show them that they've actually had it?
And describe to us what they do. You just talked about the finger prick.
The rapid test is a finger stick. So just like the rapid HIV test, just like so many other, you do a finger stick, you get a couple of drops of blood, it reacts, and it goes along a lateral column. You can see the liquid going, and if it's positive, it shows bands of activity. So
how do you get the sample? What is it?
It's just a finger stick.
Oh, it is still blood.
It's a finger stick, just
all right.
blood. But like I said, many of those tests have not been validated. The commercially available tests from Quest and LabCorp have more it's internal validation in those companies, and sure, they stand to make millions of dollars from testing so many people, but
it's America
afterwards, I trust
and medicine.
Them. And they're going to be severely regulated by the FDA, where a lot of small companies won't.
Yeah.
They have a lot. They have a lot to lose. That test to come back as a blood test, just a regular blood draw in a regular speckled red tube like you get for so many other things, and it comes back in 24 to 36 hours.
24 to 36.
They're
so
very
Napoleon and Misty and I, we all three know that we have not ever we're not COVID-19 and coronavirus. Is it worthwhile if we're certain in our situation? Misty had the test. Napoleon just said he wants the test. I hadn't thought about the test. Is there any value in the three of us who have not been COVID-19 to have an antibody test?
Outside of the special skills on our resumes, of course.
Right.
Well, you guys clearly had an exposure. You tested negative for acute disease.
Oh, we could be asymptomatic.
Yeah, but you did test negative for acute disease, but it was, it was weeks ago. So it was early in the process and early in the testing process. I think at this point, an antibody test will confirm that you didn't have it. Because if you're negative, and if you are positive, that means you did have exposure.
The best news for us, for me, I'll only talk personally, the best news would be that I have antibodies, that I contracted
That's why I took the
COVID.
test.
I didn't even know I was asymptomatic. Right. That would be the best result, wouldn't it?
Yes.
For you, yeah. I mean, I'm glad to have antibodies, because, I wear a mask because I respect that people are afraid, and I wear a mask for other people. I don't really feel like I need a mask right now but I want to make other people feel comfortable. And I think that's very important. These protesters who are out there, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask, and shooting people because they make them wear masks.
Nurses counter-protesting, yeah. Well, if anyone else has questions, we have Dr. Grossman with us every Thursday for this special section. So send it in to us. We'd love to ask him your questions.
And my third thing, I don't know if you call this good news, but the Washington Post has now started a death clock to show the excess deaths in the United States because of the incompetence of the Trump administration. And every day
tonight, we'll certainly be adding that to our repertoire.
I think you should be showing it every single day. I think people should be posting it on Facebook every day, but it comes from the Washington Post.
Yeah,
very interesting. It's worse than the doomsday clock.
Again, America, we think this is very valid and important. I can't help but notice we started coronavirus facts 8 weeks ago. And now you can't turn on MSNBC and CNN without them leading at the top of the hour facts. That's what they call it. Both networks call it that. We're trying to accomplish that, and I think we're ahead of the curve, and we're LGBT, which is exactly what is so great about having Dr. Grossman here with us tonight, because our focus is on our community. That's what we're talking about here. Before we get into viewer questions, one thing that popped into my mind when you talked about remdesivir, I am curious, I apologize for the ignorance of this question, but how do they come up with some of these ridiculous names of drugs? How do they do that?
There's a committee that develops the generic names. Now the IVIR is all antivirals. So you have tenofovir, you have
they just aim to make it something that Al can't pronounce.
Yeah, can you speak English, Dr. Grossman? Because I have no idea what you said.
It's the generic names aren't so crazy. It's some of the brand names that
so like remdesivir. I'm just curious. How would they come up with a name like that?
I said there's the ending tells you it's an antiviral. Acyclovir. Lots of people know that one from treating herpes. A lot of the
Napoleon's very familiar with that, apparently. No, I'm only kidding.
All right, we're going to move on to our next viewer question.
But the other thing I will say about this program, as opposed to MSNBC and CNN, a friend of mine likes to call those stations terror porn, because all they do is keep people frightened.
Right.
Here, you are giving people practical advice on how to live and on things that matter to them. You're answering questions that come from the audience of the things that are practical and how to deal with this.
That's exactly true. I've felt that way for a long time, that a lot of news is just terror. It's terrorism. It inspires fear versus hope or information. And that's one of the things that's been so great about Q News tonight, is that we really focus not just on the solutions, but the information that's needed to know, and not done in a melodramatic way, even if Al's presenting it. We just make sure that you have the information you need.
Did you laugh, Dr. Grossman? Did I hear a laugh out of you? Let's jump right into your viewer questions. And I'm going to lead it off tonight. We're going to return. We were fascinated. This is not a viewer question. This is a Q News Tonight question. We were fascinated by what you said. Congressman Shalala said the exact same thing last week in an interview that we had here at Q News. You said last Thursday night you did a rating. Last week you gave America's government response a letter grade of F-. Has there been any improvement this week?
No, the federal government is worse, if anything. I mean, one minute they're going to disband the coronavirus task force, the next minute it's back, but it's going to have different people. I love the meme that says they're going to be inviting celebrity apprentice people into
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, it is a.
It's a shit show.
Can I shit show on this? Okay,
you absolutely can.
And it's worse, and it confuses people, and it's creating these.
So we're still at F-, and because there isn't anything less than that, we're still at an F-.
Right.
That's what you've just told us.
Some state governments, I will give A's and B's.
New York, Maryland.
New York, Maryland, California.
We're in Florida.
Oregon, Washington, Illinois.
We're in Florida.
He's not going to say Florida.
Not Florida, say Florida.
Yeah, right. All right.
I think our governor, he's not the worst, that's for sure. I mean, I think you look at
Kansas,
the governor,
Texas,
Iowa, where they're
Puerto
forcing
Rico.
people back into these meatpacking plants, or they will be denied unemployment benefits forever.
We don't have that question tonight, but you open the door. Let's put it right in front of you. The president implements the Defense Protection Act for meat, but didn't do it and will not do it for testing. What's going on in his head? Why is he not initiating it for medical need?
The man who serves heroes, hundreds of McDonald's hamburgers. You're asked the question.
Yeah.
I mean, what is his life except about meat? And the guy only cares about what happens to him or his cronies or the people around him.
Absolutely.
And,
Let's.
well, that's why he cares about meat. But the people, but in Iowa, you have the governor stating and putting into practice in the legislature there that if these meat packers do not go back to work, they're considered to have quit their jobs and they cannot get unemployment insurance, and they will never be able to get unemployment insurance in the future.
Terrible. Let's jump right into viewer questions. And Napoleon, we're going to start with you.
This first viewer asks, do you think Pfizer's new clinical trial shows promise?
Well, I mean, it shows promise because, as we've been saying, this is not 1982 in the early days of HIV. We have scientific technology that developed a vaccine in a matter of weeks, really, that's potentially effective. The technology is staggering. But remember, this is a phase 1 trial. Phase 1 trials are basically to decide if a compound or an intervention is going to kill people. So you treat healthy people and you see what the effect is. It's not an efficacy trial that, you move into phase 2 and phase 3. Those, phase 2 is really looking for an effect. Phase 3 is looking for an effect in a large population and those are the phases before approval. Phase 4 are trials that happen after approval.
Explain to LGBT America what Napoleon, the viewer's question on Pfizer, the process, the general timeline. Let's assume that this phase 1 for Pfizer shows whatever degree of promise becomes a threshold. How does the timeline work from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3?
Phase 1 is going to show that the vaccine didn't hurt anybody. Okay, that's the big thing. Then they move into phase 2. Phase 2 is going to see if this works. Now, how do you tell if a vaccine works? You need time. Okay, the factor is time. How long is it? If it protects, how long will it protect? That's going to take a while. And then you go into phase 3, which is widespread testing in a large population. And then you have to go into mass production. So personally, and I don't mean to be downer about this, but I think this 1 year timeline is ridiculous because we need to make sure the vaccine works for an extended period of time to prevent coronavirus.
Your soundbite that you just delivered to LGBT America is the Pfizer beginning of the trial virtually cannot have any effect for over a year.
It depends on how many people get treated in the large trials and how effective it seems to be, what sort of antibody levels it develops. There's a lot of questions, but trials take time. And that means we're going to have to figure out how to live with this virus for quite a while.
I didn't know until right now that the announcement of the Pfizer trial had nothing to do with the effect on COVID. It's just to make sure that the drug doesn't harm someone that doesn't have it. That's very interesting.
And sometimes you'll see some effect, but how long, again, with vaccines, the effect is time. How long is it going to last?
But your intention is to do no harm.
Right.
Another viewer.
And so when you ask me if I'm optimistic, I love to be optimistic, but there's no data yet.
Yeah, okay.
But it's exciting that it's here already.
Another viewer asked, is there any medical science to suggest that reopening states may not go as badly as we think it will?
What's interesting? I mean, I read an article this morning that in Arizona, the governor basically fired the scientists who were doing predictions of what reopening was going to be the way he was doing it there. And of course, he's a Republican. And so he basically fired all these University of Arizona people who were doing the calculations because he didn't want to hear the answer. That's happening all over the place. So, I think these scientists are not being paid. They're not being paid to go on television necessarily. They don't care if people's eyeballs are on them. They're trying to deliver honest science. They're giving a range of outcomes. But a lot of it's negative for these places like Georgia and Arizona and Texas and places that are not doing this in a smart way.
Is there anything are there any signals from people like you? You're on Q News tonight and you're ringing the alarm all of the time. Is there anything that we should be paying attention to from the medical community that we can tell they're telling us you need to be paying attention to this and try to push out what you said the Arizona governor does. Is there anything that we should be paying attention to from the medical community?
Well, we have to look at new infection rates. We have to look at how easy it is for one person. How many people can one person spread this to? What they call the R rate. How many people one person might be infecting. We have to look at the curves of infections. So if you take, this week another thing we learned, if you take the New York data out of the national curve, that curve of new infections and deaths is going right up. And if you take New York, it's going way down. New York has been very successful in bending that curve. But because New York has such a big percentage, it has a big impact on the curve. So it makes it look like the national curve is going down. If you take the New York data out, it's going straight up.
So you suggest each state look at it on their own basis because states are opening up individually. And it's been about a week that Georgia and others have been open. Right. So perhaps in a week we'll actually get that information as to how much the infection rate has risen.
And as much as I criticize our governor, I have to say he's taking a stepwise approach to this. He hasn't reopened the 3 most impacted counties, which is us, and Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach County. He has taken a stepwise thing. He says that he'll back off if he sees rates starts to go up, if hospitals start to fill up again. That to me is the way you need to do this. That's what Germany did, right? They saw a rise in new infections. They backed right up.
We'll see what happens with that. Another viewer asks to be able to move on. We've got a lot of questions for you.
Yep.
ER doctors are baffled by what they call happy hypoxia. Can you tell us what that is? It sounds great to me. And should COVID-positive people monitor oxygen levels at home?
Well, those are good questions. I think the way I understand this happy hypoxia thing is that there are people that don't realize that they are really oxygen deprived.
Oh.
That they just they're not feeling the symptoms, and they come, so a normal, everybody's seen a pulse oximeter, the little thing that goes on your finger. And people will walk into the hospital with an oxygen concentration of 88 or 90, very, very low, and really in danger of needing intubation and not even feel it. But of course, their bodies are feeling it. And so that seems to be something that this disease can do. Is it worth doing that? Yeah, it's really hard to get a pulse oximeter these days, but a number of places doctors are making an at-home box for people to take their blood pressure, to follow their oxygen levels. Since it's not acting as a trigger to get you into the hospital, you need to know what the number is.
That can be a great gift for somebody that is positive.
And one of the key symptoms is shortness of breath related to this.
That we've said, but not all these people are short of breath.
Yeah,
they don't realize it. That's the whole thing.
Exactly. One of our viewers talked about marijuana. I always love to hear about that.
Drugs.
Me too.
Let's talk about drugs. All right, so yes, a viewer did write in about marijuana and alcohol. They say that the nerves are fried and comfort vices like marijuana and alcohol have helped them with their anxiety. But does this increase complications?
Well, let's start with alcohol, because alcohol is never a solution, because
what are you talking about? Fired. You're fired.
You're gay? You're gay.
It feels good. It feels good, but you get up the next morning feeling worse and more depressed, okay? That's what
You're not pulling the glass of red wine out of my hand after this show.
You can have that glass of red wine, but the bottle of red wine that a lot of people are
You're
having
not pulling that
night,
bottle of red wine out of my hand at the end of the show, Dr.
Your
bottle of
dead hands,
tequila.
right?
Edward Bottle Hands, man.
But I think people need to watch their alcohol intake. I think a lot of people's alcohol intake has increased. Marijuana. I fought for a long time for marijuana legalization.
A great doctor
in New York and New Jersey, and I haven't done it here yet. But marijuana has never killed anybody. Nobody's ever died from a marijuana overdose. My only caution with smoking is that this is a respiratory disease, and anything you do to cut down the barriers in your respiratory system by burning the hairs in your nose or by the hair, the hairs that beat in your lungs and keeping things from getting cleared out could have an impact. So I'd say if you're going to do pot, do edibles.
Eat it.
Or use a vaporizer, or vape it.
A vape is safer than smoking?
Vape is much safer than smoking. Marijuana volatilizes or becomes a smoke at a much lower temperature than burning. And that's why the vaporizers are so much easier on the lungs, because you're not getting the products of burning. you're just getting the volatilized.
You've just
THC.
made my advice feel a lot safer and less sinful. A question from another viewer. Does the stomach position seem as effective as a ventilator, and why does it work?
The stomach position is helps the lung.
Well, first explain that.
So that's they're talking about
Being on.
taking people who are short of breath and
Face
turning
down.
them on their stomach. You know that, and also.
Are you going to make
people
the
on
joke, or am I?
I started it. Face down.
And they're not all turned on their stomach. Some of them are turned on their sides. But basically, it's helping.
Wait, are we
to
still
clear-
talking about COVID-19?
Always.
Now we're in our birth.
But it's helping the lungs to expand better in that position. But that's something that 20 or 30 years ago you wouldn't necessarily have done, but has become more standard procedure with respiratory distress, as studies have shown that it's helpful.
So sleeping on your stomach is better for your respiratory health.
I don't know that that's true, but I think when you're just in respiratory distress, it certainly seems to be better.
We're all concerned about vaccine. I know you had a viewer question.
We talked about it briefly with you a minute ago, but this viewer specifically asked, some experts have said the earliest we can expect the vaccine is late 2021. Do you agree with this?
I would expect that don't you want to see a year's worth of protection in any vaccine that we have? You don't want a vaccine necessarily that's going to fail after just a couple of months, even if it does show some efficacy. So it's going to take time to do these studies. And
Similar to the observation you made about or ACT early on for AIDS. That's
So
the
you want
observation
someone
you
who
just made.
graduated from beauty school, not just went for a
different.
week?
That's a little bit different, but with the vaccine, and I have to say, you mentioned live virus vaccines or killed virus vaccines. We have many vaccines for viruses that don't have any active material or even inactive material in it. If you look at, for example, the hepatitis vaccines they generate one of the surface proteins of the virus to fool your body into making antibodies to that virus. There's nothing live in them at all. And so, and this is a totally different vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is an RNA vaccine that's completely different.
So our next question, the CDC, this comes with a little bit of a statement. The CDC report expects 3,000 deaths a day, which is a 9/11 every day by June 1st, and 200,000 cases a day by August. Do you believe that the worst of the outbreak is over or yet to come?
I think with the too fast relaxing of a lot of these measures, I think we could see a huge explosion again. So
Opening up too soon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we're seeing the fact that states aren't waiting until their curve is on the downward trend, but are doing this on the upward trend, it makes me wonder. I mean, I do think that it was very important to shut everything down, to take a radical move to really get people apart from each other so that we didn't overwhelm the healthcare system, so that we could take care of the sickest people who got this virus. That was really important. As we come now to 8 weeks, I think we need to start coming up with rational ways that we can accommodate to this virus. I like to say we think the virus lives in our world. We live in the world of pathogens and microbes. We live in their world. And there's lots of places in this world. Americans have been living in pretty much a fool's paradise because we thought we were in control. You go to India, you go to places in Africa, you go to Pakistan, you go to
Asia.
and in many countries they live with pathogens around them all the time. I mean, I've been to India multiple times. They live with polio, they're trying to eradicate it. They live with tuberculosis, they live with malaria. And people go to the movies and they go out to dinner, but they take certain precautions in certain situations.
Yeah, I want to interrupt there in terms of your observation about where we're at 8 weeks. I know a viewer asked about isolation and how long.
Sure. This viewer asked if you could Dr. Howard Grossman, could wave a magic wand and make the government do precisely whatever you wanted. How long would you extend social distancing measures?
Love that.
I think we're going to have to deal with some of the measures for a long time. So, for example, for uninfected people, I think wearing a mask makes a big difference. And as a person who has been infected and has antibodies, I will wear that mask to make you feel more comfortable. I think in places where there are crowds, like the grocery store, like the pharmacy, if we go to restaurants again, that's going to be important for walking in the door. The 6 feet apart thing, I'm really beginning to question it because, you go to the local grocery store, and I think we live in a city, it's especially true of the smaller supermarkets and cities, the aisles are narrow, people aren't staying 6 feet apart, they can't physically do that and be in the store.
Or mass
unless you want to
transit.
do a supermarket sweep kind of thing. You let one person in, fill their shopping cart, and out they go. But, and then you go to the cash register, and they make you stand 6 feet apart. But because you're standing 6 feet apart, the line extends down the aisle, making the aisle more crowded. So I don't really see where I get more protection from standing 6 feet apart than I do from wearing that mask in the first place and everybody else wearing it.
Yeah, and a lot of people even have the masks either not on, some people that work at these stores, or under their nose, which is
Right.
a condom with the tip cut off.
So there needs to be somebody at the front telling people, fix your mask.
So how long would you extend them?
So for masks, I think that's the kind of thing that we need to think about until we have a vaccine. Okay, for the 6 feet apart thing, I'm not sure. For the, like restaurants, for example, you can't run a restaurant at 25% capacity. I'm sorry. Now, we have restaurants here in Fort Lauderdale that are all booths. I could name the names, but we don't need to do a commercial. But they're all booths. Now, you put a plexiglass shield on top of that booth. Why can't people come into the restaurant with their mask on, sit with the people they feel comfortable being with, close to, take the mask off, eat their meal, put the mask on, leave? Okay, I don't see why we have to destroy the restaurant business in order to protect people. But I think I'm just spinning out thoughts, and there are probably people much more expert than me that could do this, but I think we need to start thinking of those things. For another example, my office, we're seeing more patients live instead of virtual. When we see them live, we've been having them sit in the parking lot. Well, pretty soon in Florida, it's going to be 98 degrees and 120% humidity. Summer's coming. But we have a garage sort of shed on the side of the building that we're redoing and putting a roof over. Well, why can't, instead of having people sit out there in the heat or sit in their cars running the engine to run their air conditioning and polluting the air and using resources, why don't we set that up where it's open on 3 sides and have an outdoor waiting area where people can be a bit apart if they want to. We can put fans and misters.
Exactly. It just takes creativity.
Right,
and
exactly.
Then our final viewer question is there hope in the medical community that this pandemic will make Americans more aware of their health?
Well, which Americans? I mean, I'm hoping that people take their health seriously. I'm hoping that we realize the fragility of our healthcare system, that we get does it have to be only Medicare for all? No, I don't think you can destroy a whole insurance industry overnight. But every single person in this country needs access to medical care. We all impact our others. I think we're seeing homeless people getting housing during this crisis. That needs to continue because, homeless people are all around us, unfortunately, and they impact the health of all of us as we impact their health. Those are 2 things that I think need to change. I'm hoping that these structural changes can start. I will say that today I wrote a letter to both of my Congress people, one in West Palm Beach where I have an office and one here in Wilton Manors. And I said it's time for the House of Representatives to form its own committee, its own COVID-19 committee, and I think they should hire all the experts that Trump is firing. I think
that's a good start.
That CDC report had to be leaked by some people. Why should our dedicated public servants have to leak information? If Congress was calling them in, they would have backup to put this information out there, and the House could release that information, and we could show what a Democratic administration would look like compared to what's going on in the White House now.
Dr. Grossman, again, we thank you. We hope valuable for you. As we said, America, we think this is unique in all of America, where we do a live question and answer where you can participate with Dr. Grossman in very interesting questions. We continue to point out when we started, this is episode 8 of Q's Q&A on coronavirus for the LGBTQ community. When we first started, we talked about a mask. Or should we use hand sanitizer? We've moved way, way, way beyond that in our inclination of this. Dr. Grossman will be back with us next Thursday night, and we invite you to tune in as we continue to follow the pandemic. And again, Dr. Grossman, thank you very much for being with us.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, we have a couple of stories that we want to focus on, and so we are going to first take a look at an interesting story that is coming out of Italy. So we're going to cue up religion. In queuing up religion, we report tonight that the Vatican has given money to a group of transgender sex workers in Italy. I almost can't believe it. Napoleon, tell us about what's going on here.
Of course, give the Jew all of the Vatican stories. The Vatican has given money to a group of transgender sex workers in Italy who are struggling to survive during the coronavirus pandemic. Gay.it, an Italian LGBTQ newspaper, reported the trans sex workers in Torvaianica, a coastal city that is outside of Rome but still fun to pronounce, and it approached a parish priest last month and asked him to help them buy food.
Reuters reported the nationwide lockdown the Italian government imposed on March 9th to curb the pandemic in the country has depleted the parish's resources. The priest therefore sent the trans sex worker request to the Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, who oversees the Vatican's charities. Krajewski sent an undisclosed amount of money to the parish. Quote, "I don't understand why this is getting so much attention," Krajewski told Reuters on April 30th during a telephone interview.
This is ordinary work, he said, for the church. It's normal. This is how the church is a field hospital. Gay.it said roughly 20 trans sex workers, mostly from Latin America, benefited from the donation. The Italian LGBTQ newspaper also reported many of them thanked Pope Francis in audio messages that they sent to Krajewski. What do y'all think about this news that the Catholic Church did this for not only trans people, but sex workers?
I don't think this should be so shocking. I think that the church should help anybody in need, including trans people. Trans people, we've talked about this on the show on a weekly basis at the minimum. Most trans women turn to survival sex work. That's just a reality, and I'm glad that the church can help them. I also wish that the Italian government would hire trans people and they wouldn't have to resort to sex work.
That last part is really important, but it's above all else, a trans person is a person.
Hello.
So how they would be helped, of course they should be helped. Any religion that spouts that they want to help people, if you're not helping all people or you're discriminating against them because of things that they can't control, then maybe you don't really want to help people. Maybe you just want to help your own agenda. And I really commend them for what they're doing in that case, because yes, it's a lot of trans people and they have different numbers, as I know Misty reports on regularly, but it's nice to see this kind of thing happen, even in a church setting.
It's a surprise to me because we reported it at Q News Tonight just this week that Pope Benedict, the previous pope, was very anti-LGBT and gay, which includes
7 years ago.
Yes, 7 years ago in the Pope. It's a dramatic change that seems to be trickling down the hill from the Pope. So it's an interesting story that we report on. We continue in some stories tonight by reporting gay culture. This is a fascinating story. Listen to this. A new children's book teaches kids how to swish and twirl like a drag queen. We've prepared a package on it. Watch this.
Hi everybody, I'm Little Miss Hot Mess, and I am the author of the new children's book, The Hips on the Drag Queen Go Swish, 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 out May 5th, 2020 from Running Press Kids. In order to celebrate the launch of the book, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a virtual Q&A on here, or as we're calling it, a Q and Slay, just to talk a little bit about my process, how I got involved with Drag Queen Story Hour, and everything that excites me about this book. So stay tuned.
To indoctrinate the nation's youth into a lifelong love of libraries and literacy. And her secret weapon is a brand new children's book entitled The Hips of the Drag Queen Go Swish, Swish, Swish. It came out last Tuesday, or a couple days ago Tuesday. Little Miss Hot Mess is a founding member of New York's chapter of Drag Queen Story Hour, a series of unaffiliated events that combine the wit and glamour of drag with gender and sexuality expansive readings for kids, young adults, and of course, adults proper.
I was confused for a moment when you said Little Miss Hot Mess and you started the story because I thought perhaps you were talking about yourself. But the new book features bright, imaginative illustrations of dancing drag queens, accompanied by kid-friendly song lyrics designed to get youngsters excited to read, move around, and express themselves. In her day job, ready for this? Little Miss is a PhD student in media studies at NYU, and her research into queer culture informs her drag persona and her interaction with kids.
While her story hour events are silly and fun, behind the makeup is a more serious intent. Her goal is to give kids the tools they need to think critically about the world around them at a time when misinformation is everywhere. Now, with the chaos of quarantine placing live events on hold, she's had to rapidly adapt to reach young minds online, with an audience that may be broader than ever before.
Little Miss Hot Mess said, quote, "Drag is about dressing up with a purpose and taking a risk, tweaking aspects of dominant culture so you're not just imitating, but transforming." And I think that's something that helps kids understand what queerness feels like without needing to get into all the adult stuff.
You know, in a world of drag in the LGBT community, we have reported in the last year how many stories that it's happening out in Queer News Tonight on drag, RuPaul, etc. What a refreshing story this is. I love RuPaul, of course, as everybody knows. But the intent here of somebody as bright as clearly this queen is, amazing what she is doing.
I'm so happy. I mean, NYU is my alma mater. I'm so excited to see two stories tonight about how they're changing the community and how the people there are changing the community. This, a lot of people know I'm not a drag queen, but I am a leather pup. And they're two sides of the same coin in so many ways. I would love to start a leather pup story hour where people can start to understand the intricacies of why you might be different if you're queer without having to get into all the sexual stuff. They are not the exact same thing. And I think a lot of adults need to realize that being different and even sexually different doesn't mean it has to be sexual exploitation to talk to children.
I've had the pleasure of actually being the drag queen that reads at Drag Queen Storytime here in South Florida at several events, including the the Fort Lauderdale Institute of Science and Industry Museum. I'm saying it totally wrong. It's not the Science and Industry Museum, that's Chicago. The Museum of Discovery and Science in Fort Lauderdale. I've done Lynn University, and I've also done Stonewall Library Museum on Sunrise Boulevard. They've hired me to come and read to the children. And it's always amazing. The adults get just as much out of the book as the children do.
I love this story also because this doctoral student at NYU proves why she's doing so great in terms of how Misty just delivered that story, and how NYU, I'm sure they're very, very proud that that Napoleon tells us that's his alma mater. That was great, Napoleon. I love that.
Wow, someone here can read and some can't. I guess we'll learn more later.
Next, speaking of joking at each other, we end the show with the big finish. There are many stories today. We only want to take a quick mention of LGBT stories that are in the news or have an LGBT perspective, kind of a short lightning round. So let's begin with the big finish. Story number one. Big news this afternoon, it was breaking. Donald Trump may have caught the coronavirus from his valet.
The president says he has nothing to worry about because the disease doesn't exist, and in another few weeks, no one will have it because of magic. I understand Pelosi now has another reason to steer clear of him and Pence. So let's just really hope maybe it goes to the third in command, Miss Pelosi.
Wait, if COVID-19 isn't real, why does he get tested several times a day? That's my first question. But I wonder if he freaked out when he found out that his valet driver was also not wearing a mask when he found out he was positive.
Perhaps this will wake up the roughly 40% of America who thinks the president can do no wrong. Realize it is utterly foolish to never wear a mask and lead to a massive cultural shift when it comes to the well-being of our fellow Americans. I posted on my social media this afternoon when I watched this news, not talking about him specifically, but saying, get ready to watch this. Does it make me a bad person to hope someone gets coronavirus? There are only two conclusions.
That's not what makes him bad.
1, karma is a bitch. Or 2, getting coronavirus and getting well means you will learn. Stop being ignorant. Stop lying. Stop being so political. Stop being only about yourself. In other words, stop being Donald Trump. And have some empathy of what hundreds of millions of Americans are going through. Probably not going to happen. So I hope, for your sake, Donald, karma is not a bitch. The big finish. No context Thursday. Elon Musk corrects Grimes' explanation of their son's name, and the new mom is not so impressed.
This is probably better than naming the kid Corona in 2020. I mean, ever since I was young and played Tekken, a fighting game on the PlayStation, there was a character called Ling Chao Yu, which was spelled very differently, and I have always made sure to ask how to pronounce names. Maybe Musk just wants his kid to get extra special attention because he fears that being the great son of Elon Musk is, too much to live up to. Resentment.
The kid's name is XAEA-12.
He's a robot.
What the actual fuck? When I first heard this story, I thought he was some weird rapper. Then I found out he's a scientist and works on spaceships and Tesla. How do you even say XAEA-12? I understand that when we're, especially in puberty, we want to stick out and we want to look different and have people stare at us and notice us. But don't force your children to stand out before they're born.
Can I just say, as a child, as a Jewish child of people that were involved in the Holocaust, I would never, ever name any of my kids any series of numbers at any rate.
That is true.
My favorite part of what Misty said was, who's this guy named Elon Musk? Well, when you name your child a series of seemingly random letters and numbers, I guess it makes sense that there may be some confusion among the parents. As every Happening Out host makes fun of my pronunciation of people's names, seriously, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this one.
It's not phonetic.
We're happy about that.
The big finish. This Sunday, May 10th, is Mother's Day.
Perhaps the biggest gay holiday in the world. Mom, you know I love you, and I am so excited to celebrate with you at a proper distance. You're up in Maryland, but I know that all of your kids will come online and make sure that you feel the love that you need because you've been doing the responsible thing and socially isolating. So I want to make sure that you receive that love, and you'll be there this Sunday and every day till. I know you're watching right now.
Don't you immediately wonder if Mrs. Napoleon Plays said that all through Napoleon's childhood? I love you, but at an appropriate distance. I love that.
That's probably what she says now, mostly. I thought the gay holiday was Halloween. Anyways, I am all about Mother's Day because I have tons of drag children and I have tons of transgender children. I did send my biological mother a Mother's Day gift as well.
Oh, nice. Good. I talked yesterday about how much my mother meant to me. When she passed away, Mother's Day became very hard for me for a number of years. But this year, I have kind of a different outlook. I want to celebrate my memory by being my best self and striving every day for happiness. It's a hard thing for me. I like to think she would be very proud of everything that I've accomplished, but it's never enough. I try to push farther, and I do that because of my mother. I love you, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. From a very, very grateful son. The big finish. Today is the National Day of Prayer.
Yeah, we already knew this. We just covered a story about Trump potentially being exposed to COVID. Let's start our own prayer circle right now. Come on, everybody.
I
We
think
can do
prayer is very important. I think that as an LGBTQ community, we need to pray for Christians, and we need to help Christians realize that God created us in his image and he made all things beautiful. We are beautiful people, and we should pray that they appreciate the diversity of his creation and to love people of different sexual orientations and gender. It takes a strong Christian to think outside of what they were taught with words instead of actually reading the Bible.
And that comes from a white Christian woman. Strange. I thought National Prayer Day was a Republican politician's holiday celebrated exclusively on Fox News. You know, the day after every mass shooting in this country? I guess there's some other reason that they do that then.
You know, in Canada, after just one mass shooting, they outlawed the entire bit of being able to buy assault rifles. Where are we on that?
One day.
The Big Finish. Happy trails to Stonewall riots historian and author David Carter. He's dead at 67.
He had an accomplished career. He was on CNN, CBS, Time Magazine, BBC, The Washington Blade, and worked with greats like Al Jazeera and Allen Ginsberg. He's not just an LGBTQ icon, he is a successful author. If you're unfamiliar, I encourage you to learn more. And like I said earlier this week, that's why Q News Tonight is so important, to introduce you to people just like this.
Knowledge is power, and I want to say rest in peace, David Carter, and thank you for sharing our valuable history. If you don't learn from history's mistakes, you are doomed to repeat them, and I'm glad that you shared the knowledge that we have.
Stonewall is hallowed ground, no joke coming from me. If you wish to learn about Stonewall, especially you young LGBTers, one of the most important events in the history of our LGBTQ community, Carter's 2004 book, Stonewall, The Riots That Sparked the Gay Revolution, is required reading. The book was the basis of PBS film Stonewall Uprising, which won a Peabody Award. He was an essential part in ensuring that the Stonewall Bar, the little park in front of it, and the surrounding area became a historic national landmark to be preserved. Mr. Carter had the presence of mind to realize just how important all of this time was, and in turn, we will forever be in his debt, as his book will teach people that are not even born yet the important facts about our history and, more importantly, our struggles. In a much smaller way, we did 8 months of weekly tributes called The Road to Stonewall, leading up to the 50th anniversary. I hope you go back and watch them. And I thank you, David Carter, and I hope you rest in peace. The Big Finish. On this day in 1912, Columbia University approves plans for awarding the Pulitzer Prize in several categories after established by Joseph Pulitzer.
Now, most of the Pulitzer Prizes are given to authors, and many of them are LGBTQ. In fact, I encourage you to look up that long list. It's really exciting. Unfortunately, I imagine that this is one of the next awards to get cut because Trump doesn't understand its value, having never read a book himself.
Unfortunately, I think you're probably right. David Carter did win a Pulitzer, by the way, for his book about Stonewall.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's awesome. And in 2020, President Donald Trump confuses the Nobel Prize with the Pulitzer Prize because it's just another dumb thing that he believes is beneath him. Right. America is currently broken, and the Pulitzer Prize is the perfect representation of that. An award created with the idea of awarding excellence in journalism, literature, and education. Now what is awarded in our government is the ability to be a sycophant, the willingness to tell blatant lies to the American people, and to further Donald Trump's agenda. There's no rewards or awards in that. The reason the president doesn't know the difference between a Nobel Prize and a Pulitzer Prize is because he's never had to earn anything in his entire life. So he has no respect for awards that one must earn and are not simply given out to the person with the largest checkbook. We in the LGBT community should always strive for excellence, even if those who oppose us rarely do, because in the long run, it will only serve all of us better. Don't sink to his level. Fight every day and vote this November 3rd. And I have faith we will have a president that knows what the Pulitzer is. Well, that is tonight's Q News Tonight. And we remind you that we are here every night at 7 p.m. It is first and foremost for our community. And we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again at 7 on Q News Tonight.